14th, and I welcome all of you to the state's premier civic affairs event. I'm Melody Rose, the president of City Club, and I would like to welcome all of our members and guests here today. Those of you who are today in the room at the Oregon Governor Hotel, and those of you listening on OPB or KBPS radio, and of course, those of you watching on Portland Community Media's CityNet 30. Today, we welcome OPB President and CEO Steve Bass, who will discuss the importance of public broadcasting. But first, just a few announcements. To kick off our program, I would like to give a warm welcome to any of City Club's newest members or guests today. If you are a City Club new member or guest, would you please stand so that we can welcome you? City Club's corporate and media partners are, of course, essential to both the vitality and the sustainability of all of the club's activities. I'd like to give a very big thank you to our media partners, including Oregon Business Magazine, and extend our deep appreciation to the Friday Forum corporate sponsors. Please join me in offering our sincerest thanks to our fall quarter sponsors, AARP Oregon, Barron Liebman, and PGE. We're very thankful for your support. And as always, I would be remiss if I didn't invite the rest of you to consider corporate sponsorship. If you're interested, please see our friendly Friday Forum staff in the corner of the room or call the City Club office. And did you know that each week, an estimated 15,000 members and guests listen to Friday Forum on the radio? Your contribution of $250 funds one Friday Forum video and audio recording, making this time-honored forum available online, on the radio, and on local television stations to thousands of Oregonians every single week. Please donate generously to the City Club's annual fund using the envelopes provided on your tables or at the back of the room. Your gift keeps all Oregonians informed. Following today's speech, we'll be welcoming City Club members to a microphone for a question and answer session with our speaker. In addition, we invite all of you here today to write a speaker question on the index cards provided on your tables. During the board host question, City Club staff will collect these cards from you and pick a few questions, which I will read from the microphone up here on the dais. We're sure that you'll have some great questions for today's speaker. And now to our program. From its start as part of the Oregon Agricultural College in 1922, Oregon Public Broadcasting has tied Oregonians together. OPB has since grown to become a nationally respected public radio and television operation that reaches far and wide across the region. Recently, National Public Radio, a significant source of OPB's radio programming, made headlines when Congress debated terminating its federal financial support. Today, Steve Bass, President and CEO of Oregon Public Broadcasting, will discuss how the potential impact of losing federal funding makes this a time of both opportunities and challenges for OPB. He will also address significant changes in how news is covered and delivered, and the critical importance of public broadcasting to an informed and engaged citizenry. Steve Bass has served as president and CEO of Oregon Public Broadcasting since 2006. Under his leadership, OPB has won two of the nation's most prestigious journalism awards, a DuPont Columbia University Award and a Peabody Award. Previously, Steve served as founding president and CEO of Nashville Public Television, where he oversaw that station's transition from government ownership to an independent, nonprofit public television station. He currently volunteers on the boards of directors for the World Affairs Council of Oregon and the Oregon East Symphony. In addition, I understand he's an active freelance musician with regional symphony orchestras and chamber music groups. And with that, please join me in welcoming our guest today, Steve Bass.
Thank you, Melody. It's great to be here. When I told my wife I was speaking here today, she said, "You're not going to be depressing, are you?" And I hope I'm not. After talking about the issue of federal funding, there certainly are more upbeat topics to talk about, and I hope to hit those. And I must say, I wasn't really expecting to be with you here today, but I'm delighted to do so. I kind of filled in on short notice. But you know, the timing is actually quite good as we're just finishing up our fall membership campaign. So I can only hope that when this is broadcast this evening at 7 o'clock on OPB, people don't think that it's just one extended pledge break. And I do promise not to ask you for money today. So thank you for having me here. I last spoke to the City Club in February of 2006, about 2 months after I arrived here at OPB. And I decided as I was preparing for this to pull out that speech and see what it was that I said back then, what was on my mind, and to see what has happened since then, and to do some reflection on that. Well, it was an entirely different world back then. The economy was booming, absolutely booming. Housing prices were at historic highs. So I got to buy a house at that historic high, and I guess I'll be sticking around for a while as a result. But we were also on the verge not of only an economic bust that I'm not going to dwell on, but also a great leap forward in technology. In 2006, I talked a lot about how OPB was available to new and different ways, and the availability of more programming through the new revolution of digital television. The iPhone and the iPad weren't invented. And today, the mobile revolution is in full swing. More than 25,000 people so far have downloaded the OPB News app for their smartphones, and now they can listen to OPB wherever they may be in the world. When I was last here, there definitely wasn't an app for that, so a lot has changed. I talked a lot about the impending technological changes and the challenge of the digital television transition. We were at a very, very critical time back then, with a federal mandate to convert all of our rural television translators to the digital standard. We faced the challenge of finding literally millions and millions of dollars to do that in order to ensure that all Oregonians would receive digital and equal service rather than shortchanging our neighbors on the coast and the east side of the Cascades. Thankfully, in 2007, the state of Oregon stepped up with funding to ensure that no one in Oregon would be left behind. That really did help us continue to fulfill our mission of providing equal access throughout the state, and we really appreciate the leadership of Governor Kulongoski and the legislature. In 2006, covering our region's vast territory with broadcast signals in order to achieve OPB's mission of giving voice to communities, connecting Oregon and its neighbors, and illuminating a wider world was very much top of mind. Since then, we've significantly expanded our radio network, financed through non-governmental sources. We've added 9 radio stations to our news and information network. We provide now better service in Eugene, along the coast, the gorge, and in communities in eastern Oregon, including the first public radio service into Enterprise in Wallowa County. We now have nearly 12 radio stations across the region, and some of you might be able to recite the long list of call signs and locations that the FCC requires us to read at the top of every hour, and yes, they do require us to do that. I think that if this trend continues, we really are at a risk of spending far more time on those call letters than we will on the news. 2 years ago, we created an innovative partnership with Mount Hood Community College for the operation of their jazz radio station, KMHD, which you can find in the Portland area at 89.1 FM. It's still owned by the college, but it's now operated by OPB. And that station now has half of the overhead that it had back then, a larger audience, and we've protected one of only a few full-time jazz stations found anywhere in the nation. The last time we counted, there were fewer than 14 full-time jazz stations in the country, and it's really quite remarkable that Portland, being the size that it is one of them. And now we're seeking ways to provide broader geographic coverage for that station as well, to see if we can be providing jazz in other parts of Oregon. I think, in fact, we might have it on in Burns, Oregon, of all places. We happen to have a translator there and thought, let's put the jazz station on there, you never know. So while I was very concerned about covering Oregon back in 2006, and by that I mean covering and blanketing Oregon with broadcast signal, today I'm concerned about covering Oregon in a very different way. One of the most profound and important changes since 2006 is how the region's stories and issues are covered by the news media for the benefit of an informed and an engaged citizenry. Now, we're going to continue at OPB to cover the region with television and radio signals. We look at that as being critical to our mission, to provide that kind of access to people wherever they are. And we know that thousands and thousands and thousands of people rely on broadcast television and radio for news, quality entertainment, children's programming, and the like. So we will continue to broadcast all of that. But today, our most critical emphasis is on covering the stories that matter to people, that connect our communities and build understanding among people who may be disconnected by geography, ideology, or experience. Almost by default, OPB is now the only state-level media in Oregon that connects communities to each other and to the world. So today, our most important role is providing more people with better access to better information. Now, this role for OPB is more important than ever because of the crisis that has befallen journalism in the last few years. Newspapers, due to a combination of internet technology and more lately the economy, have shrunk. In fact, the most visceral thing that you can notice about what's happening to the news is just weigh the newspaper compared to what it was 5 or 10 years ago. Home deliveries in some parts of the region are a thing of the past, and in some cases, like the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, newspapers are gone altogether. Fortunately, that's not the case in Portland and most parts of Oregon. That change, though, began almost instantaneously in 2008. The faltering economy hammered the real estate, auto, and retail sectors, which provide the largest amount of advertising for newspapers and indeed local television as well. They shrank in size and weight nearly overnight. With fewer advertisers, there were fewer pages to fill with news, and fewer reporters were employed. According to the Pew Project for Excellence in Journalism's State of the Media Report for 2011, which just came out a couple of months ago, newspapers today employ 30% fewer journalists than they did a decade ago. So think of the beats that aren't covered. Here in Oregon, people that have longer experience than I do say that down at the State House, there used to be 15, 20, 25 different reporters full-time covering the Oregon legislature. Now there are 5, and one of them is ours. So now we, in a sense, have 20% share of the legislative coverage. TV news has been hard hit as well. Broadcast networks shuttered their foreign bureaus and limited their coverage to a few hotspots. 10 years ago, I recall that CBS had somewhere in the area of 15 to 18 foreign bureaus. I believe they're down to 2, which is really quite remarkable. Network morning news programs have turned more towards celebrity and the latest high-profile crime. Local stations in many areas of the country have added hours of news coverage, which is terrific, but few could invest in more reporters and editors to expand the number of stories to fit the expanded number of hours. So what we tend to see is the same stories over and over again. Cable news, I almost don't even want to bring up, but I guess I will. They've largely followed the playbook of talk radio with opinion-driven formats. It makes business sense because undertaking news and paying reporters is both difficult and expensive, whereby it's far easier and far more profitable to just have an opinionated host who can sit there and take phone calls or discuss things, and you don't really have to do much investigation. Now, some of the changes that we've seen in the news media is due to the economy, but a lot more of it is due to the changing habits of news consumers and the impact of technology on our lives. Because of the internet, people don't have to wait for tomorrow morning's newspaper delivery, that satisfying thump on the front porch that we used to wait for to see what was going on in the world. And we don't have to wait for tonight's network newscast to find out what's going on. You can find out on your phone, on your tablet computer, or on your computer. Or if you have hundreds of friends like me on Facebook and Twitter followers and people that I follow on Twitter, News keeps coming to me continuously throughout the day. There's almost no way to shut it off. So we know what's going on in the world, at least the top stories. Now, we've known for years that the potential of the internet, the potential the internet had to change literally everything. Not long ago, I found a great video on YouTube that I wish I could share with you today. I have no video capability to do that, but if you want to watch it, I'll tell you where to get to see it afterwards. It's a story from a San Francisco TV station from 1981 about the San Francisco Chronicle's introduction of an online newspaper available to a mere handful of subscribers in the Bay Area. That was back when the internet was something called Prodigy. Anybody remember Prodigy with those numbers, those long numbers for your email address? Well, what you needed back then was a dial-up modem. It took 2 hours to download the paper, and it included all of the text, but none of the ads, none of the graphics, none of the pictures. It was crude, it was slow, but boy, was it ahead of its time. And it really does show you, in an eerie sort of way, how much we could have predicted 30 years ago. I mean, the whole tone of the newscast was kind of laughing at this, is who would download a newspaper, take 2 hours, not realizing that now you can download that content literally instantaneously. We could see this coming, and I see much more change in the future. I would say today there is little doubt that we're going through one of the most disruptive technological changes since the invention of movable type. Everything is changing before our eyes. We don't know all of the impacts of this, but we can start to see them. Not only can you and me and just about everybody else access what you want to read, what you want to hear, or what you want to watch, just about whenever and wherever you are, new digital tools give individuals opportunities to create their own content. Anyone can be an author today, or a columnist, a video producer, or a storyteller, and seek the limelight as the next viral phenomenon or the next YouTube sensation. And what's amazing is you can do almost all of that on a little device like this iPhone. It's really remarkable what they're packing into these little packages. Now, these changes in many ways play to OPB's strengths. In this environment, not being reliant on advertising is a huge advantage. Being directly accountable to your viewers, your listeners, your readers, rather than to the advertisers who seek to influence them, in my view, is a huge strength, and it also builds trust. I've been doing public broadcasting for 30 years, and I remember doing some speeches with network executives who used to always kind of laugh about the fact that public broadcasting really didn't have a business model, that we were kind of the nonprofit arm of the media world. And boy, has that really changed. A lot has changed. Some observers believe that our model of diverse support from individuals, from foundations, from corporations, and some government funds may be the most resilient model for the future, and it may be the model upon which public service journalism is built. Now, when I was here in 2006, radical changes in journalism really weren't on my mind at all. I saw our role as being a secondary or a supplementary source of news and information. We were the place you tuned into when you wanted more depth, more analysis after you read the newspaper. When the bust hit, we prepared for the worst like most organizations. We figured that our revenues would decline. We made some cuts. We prepared to make more if necessary. And, as we would have expected, our support from businesses and foundations dropped pretty significantly. But oddly enough, not nearly as much as we thought, and the corporate side did not fall nearly as much as the advertiser-supported side in commercial television and radio. But something really unexpected happened. Our support from individuals held rock solid. In fact, our number of donors increased to an all-time high, even though the average amount that each person gave was a bit less. In fact, we broadened our base. Our audiences grew, particularly on the radio and on the web, and we began to hear new things from our consumers, that OPB was even more important to them than ever. And people now tell us again and again that we are now one of their most important and primary sources of news and information, and among the most trusted. Now, this is something I never anticipated would happen, a transition of OPB becoming much more of a primary source of news. And I got to tell you that on some levels, it scares the heck out of me because it's not a role that we were ever designed to fulfill, but I think it's something that we're going to have to step up and do. Because we have more expansive geographic reach than any media in Oregon, with a unique ability to tie together the urban, the rural, and just about everything in between. We can provide more people with better access to better information, and that's now our driving force. For the 1.5 million people each week who listen to our radio or watch our television stations, we're going to be here long into the future serving up programming that you value. But increasingly, people are also using those smartphones, the internet, tablets, social media like Facebook and Twitter as a way of accessing information and entertainment. So we have to be there as well. So not only do we have to maintain our fairly expensive TV and radio transmission facilities, but if we are going to remain relevant and central to people's lives, we must also be investing in digital media, and we've done that. We're finding some interesting things there as well. We're finding that younger and more diverse audiences are engaging with our content on these new platforms. It's sometimes surprising to learn that younger people often like the same things that we do. That's really surprising. I've got 2 teenagers, so that shocks the heck out of me. They just consume it differently. They might not own a TV, they might not own a radio, but they use OPB. So last week I was talking to my daughter via Skype, another thing that I don't think existed in 2006. She's in Tokyo for the year, at a junior year abroad, and she told me that she held a party in her dorm room for a group of European students, and they were watching Downton Abbey, streaming it from ITV in Britain, and watching it on a computer. And I thought, well, that's exactly the same program that I like, but she's just watching it in a different way. That's really fascinating. So that's the other area we have to pay attention to. So since 2006, we've increasingly focused on covering the region's stories. We've added reporters, we've added editors, programs, and web resources. Our newsroom now is 3 times the size it was just a little over a decade ago. But we're still significantly smaller in comparison to the newsroom at a metropolitan daily like the Oregonian. They may have shrunk some, but they are still significantly larger than our operation. But fortunately, size isn't the sole determinant of success and what you can achieve. How you use the resources is critically important as well. We choose our beats and our subjects very carefully, knowing we just can't cover everything. We leave out coverage of sports, weather, and crime, let others follow that, and we focus on beats like government, education, environment, natural resource policy, arts, lifestyle, and culture, and a few other things. As you probably know, we launched our daily radio program, Think Out Loud, in 2007. It's now hosted each morning and repeated each evening at 9 o'clock by Dave Miller, and it's become a centerpiece of our coverage of the region's political, civic, intellectual, and cultural life. Earlier this week, Think Out Loud, in cooperation with Portland Literary Arts, announced the National Book Award nominees. I hope some of you caught that. That was the first time that's ever been done in the Northwest. And believe it or not, the first time it's ever been broadcast on public broadcasting live. That was quite a coup. Last week, we did stories on Occupy Portland, the Oregon lottery going online, arming campus police. This morning, we had former Governor Roberts on talking about her career in politics. We cover a lot of ground each week in that 1 hour, and we hope we do it with the kind of depth and intelligence that you expect from us. We established a Central Oregon Bureau in Bend in 2007. It was our first bureau outside of the Willamette Valley. We can now cover the vast territory of Central and parts of Eastern Oregon in ways that we couldn't cover them in the past. As an example, a few weeks ago, David Nogueras, our correspondent there, did a great story about the impact on the possible closing of post offices in rural communities. And he drove something like 150 miles out to this tiny community to find out what the impact of closing that town's rural post office would have. Just a few months ago, we created a bureau in Southern Oregon, in Medford, and we hope to create more bureaus around the region in the months ahead. We have plans on the board to put one in Eugene and one in Clark County in Southwest Washington as soon as we can acquire the funding to get them started. We landed a major grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to fund a unique partnership of public broadcasting stations who are dedicated to increasing coverage of the environment and issues related to it. We call it EarthFix. It's news that's fixed on the environment. We've added 8 new journalists around the region, including 3 in Portland, 2 in Seattle, 1 in Boise, who focus exclusively on the environmental beat with stories that you can see on the web, hear on the radio, and see on television as well. And that working with other public broadcasters has been really a fabulous experience, so that we know that the Northwest is unusually interested in the environment, and many times those environmental issues are very much front and center in terms of the political interactions that we have in our region. We're also working in new ways to tell stories more creatively and with greater impact. Our radio and television operations in 2006 worked more in parallel than they did together. Now it's not unusual to hear Oregon Field Guide reporters Ed Yon or Vince Patton on the radio, or posting news on the web that they've uncovered while they're out in the field, rather than holding it onto it for a new season of Oregon Field Guide that you might see 5, 6, or 8 months later. We're also putting a renewed emphasis on arts and culture reporting through a new Arts and Life website. We know that the focus on arts and culture has diminished in the last few years, and we know that our audiences rely on us to be a critical link to the unique culture and lifestyle here in Oregon and the Northwest. So building on our 13-year track record with TV's Oregon Art Beat, we're focusing even more on those stories that matter. And now we're not limited to just a 30-minute weekly television program. We've piloted a radio program about arts and culture that we hope to put on the air at some point. But we're also doing things specifically on the web, highlighting wonderful work, great places, work that arts and culture institutions are doing in this region that people should know about. And you're going to hear more about this in the months ahead. We're also building editorial partnerships with news organizations around the region, and not just public broadcasters, but commercial enterprises as well. It's now, for example, not very unusual to read a story reported by OPB on the website of the East Oregonian in Pendleton or the Daily Astorian, and see or perhaps even hear one of their stories on OPB. Not long ago, we actually ran a radio report produced by the Daily Astorian about the visit of the prince from I think it was the descendant of one of the Astors who was out visiting there, and we thought, gee, what a great story, let's just use their story. We want to build on those partnerships. We don't see the future of journalism through a competitive lens, and we see it as a public service, and working with partners like the Daily Astorian, the East Oregonian, and frankly, anyone else that shares our standards and values, we think increases that public service, and we're eager to do so. Our efforts are paying off. Today, OPB radio is at or near the top of the most listened radio stations in the Portland market. We have one of the largest audiences across the nation. Our TV audiences remain large and loyal, and our audience on the web is growing continuously. And as Melody mentioned in the introduction, our investments haven't gone unnoticed. In the past 2 years, we've won 2 of the most prestigious awards that can go to broadcasters and journalists: the DuPont Columbia Award for our television documentary, The Silent Invasion, which some say is the equivalent of a Pulitzer Prize. And then last year, we won a Peabody Award, which is not limited to journalism. It is a worldwide award for broadcast media, and we won that for a series we did on the impact of the economy on rural Oregon families. It's rather like winning a Pulitzer Prize and an Academy Award back to back. And we went to the Peabodys, we got to hang out with some cool folks like the cast of Glee and Modern Family. That was pretty cool for my 17-year-old. She thought that was great. Just last week, it was announced that OPB will be producing a Republican presidential candidate debate on March 19th, sponsored by the Oregon Republican Party and sanctioned officially by the Republican National Committee. This will be one of only 3 or 4 officially sanctioned debates, and will be the first ever exclusively available nationwide on public television and radio stations. This is going to be quite a feather in Oregon's cap, and it's going to bring us worldwide attention and should be very interesting to watch. We don't know who the candidates will be. We don't know how many there will be. We know that there are going to be fewer of them then than there are now, which actually will allow us to ask some things in greater depth and give them more than 30 seconds to respond. So we've expanded over the last 5 years and taken risks at a time of great economic uncertainty. Frankly, it would be safer not to have done that. But I like to remember a quote from John Shedd, who famously said, "A ship in a harbor is safe, but that's not what ships are built for." With so much at stake in our nation and our region, with the decline of fact-based reporting, staying safe in the harbor isn't really an option. And I have to say that we're really fortunate at OPB to have thousands of loyal supporters and a board of directors led in recent years by great people like Doug Tennell, Sherwin Davidson, who's here with us today, Andrew Franklin, and now Libby Schwartz, who believe the same thing. They believe that we should be looking at ways to better serve audiences across the region. Now, indeed, there are dangers out there, some big ones. In the last year, federal funding for public broadcasting has been under what some would call a full-scale assault. I've been doing this for over 30 years, and I can tell you these things tend to come in waves. I remember the federal funding fight of 1981, and then there was one in 2005, and it seems about every 5 years or so something happens, and we are back on the front page, and there is some big flap we have to deal with. In 2005, the House took up a bill to defund the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is the entity that distributes the federal funding to public broadcasters like OPB. By a huge bipartisan majority, that bill was defeated. And we pulled over 87 Republicans to defeat that bill. This latest crisis began about a year ago with the firing of commentator Juan Williams, then a heavily edited so-called sting video by James O'Keefe of Acorn fame, which led to the resignation of NPR's president. I was a member of the board of NPR at the time, and I can tell you I was heavily engaged in the crisis and the aftermath, and I've got the battle scars to prove it. These events precipitated what's now the next chapter in a debate that has gone on literally for years about federal government support of public broadcasting. And in some ways, it's not at all a debate about the merits of public broadcasting. It's really a clash of ideologies. Some argue that public broadcasting shouldn't receive government support, or that it should be free to compete in the marketplace in ways that it currently cannot. Others believe that federal funding is an appropriate and important source of support and keeps public broadcasting focused on its mission. And there are some who believe that government funding should actually be increased, that we should have more of a BBC kind of system where the government provides literally all of the funding, but with significantly increased restrictions and/or mandates placed upon it. For OPB, federal government support makes up about 9% of our total budget. That's about $2.5 million a year. Now that might be more or that might be less than you thought it would be, but 9%, that's what it is. For some stations around the country, it's significantly more. We're about average. And that funding, I have to tell you, is critically important to serve Oregon's remote and rural communities where the cost of operation exceeds the potential to raise funds to fully support the service. Like everything else in our state in terms of the rural and urban, it's the rural that needs a subsidy in order to provide services. Now, OPB today is far less reliant on government support than it was a decade ago when the state government provided about $2 million a year to that operating budget. Some of you might remember in 2002 when that funding went away. We've gotten some capital funding, but it's never really come back, and I would not be optimistic that it will anytime in the near future. Without federal funding, OPB will face a very stark choice. We could limit our service to areas where we have sufficient contributions to fully support it and ignore the rest of the region. Or we could reduce our news coverage and programming in order to maintain service literally to everyone. It's frankly not a choice I ever want to make. I spend time in rural Oregon, and I can tell you that people there value OPB as much as those in the metro area do. There just aren't as many of them. Steve Amon of Oregon Field Guide took a trip last month to Burns, Ontario, Baker City, and LeGrand, and he drew crowds actually as large or larger than the one in this room. He was like a rock star, and they were incredibly enthusiastic. For people in Pendleton, Lapine, or Lakeview as well, OPB is a lifeline to the rest of the state, the nation, and the world, and we hear this literally all the time. Having lived through the two previous assaults on public broadcasting in 1995 and 2005, I can tell you that this one is very, very different. The political climate is far more toxic. There's little bipartisan cooperation. And I think the chances of pulling over significant numbers of Republicans to vote along with Democrats is not likely in this environment. And there are also more concerns about federal spending, and that's much higher than it was in the past, and perhaps appropriately so. Even so, the debate has been blown way out of proportion. So much, in fact, that The Onion, which is one of my news sources, it's a satirical website that calls itself America's finest news source, and was recently famous for trying to promote itself for a Pulitzer Prize. They wrote an article with the headline, and I kid you not, GOP completely fixes economy by canceling funding for NPR. Now, like many things in The Onion, there's a grain of truth in the humor. This story was actually based on a poll conducted by CNN and Opinion Research that found that many, many Americans vastly overstated the amount of the federal budget that is dedicated to public broadcasting. 30% of the respondents, this 1/3 of the respondents, believe that public broadcasting takes up 5% or more of the total federal budget. While 7% believe it took up 50% or more. I can't even begin to think about what we would do with that much money, but I'll try. So in the spin rooms of the 24-hour news channels and talk radio stations in the echo chamber of the nation's capital, facts sometimes are forgotten in the zeal of a good argument. And you kind of think that they almost need to have somebody like public broadcasting giving them the facts about how much money public broadcasting is getting. Somehow that has to happen. Now, we did take a funding hit last year. We lost a $20 million a year program at the U.S. Department of Commerce that provided matching funds for transmitters and other broadcasting equipment. That was eliminated. I don't think it's going to come back. That's been a very important program for us because every time we extend our service, we can generally count on the federal government to provide half of the capital funding. And the Corporation for Public Broadcasting lost $30 million in their funding as well. We may lose more as this debate goes on in the months ahead. Funding levels could be affected by the work of the so-called super committee that's due to have its report in a month or so. And we might see a frontal assault based on ideological lines like the recently proposed House bill that could forbid OPB and other public broadcasting stations from using CPB funds to acquire programming from NPR, but would not reduce the investment in public broadcasting by a single penny. The Northwest is going to feature very prominently in this upcoming debate and about the continued federal funding of public broadcasting. Representative Earl Blumenauer, who couldn't be here with us today, created the House Public Broadcasting Caucus, and he works actively to engage his colleagues in support of public broadcasting. If there's a debate on the floor about public broadcasting, you know that Earl will be right in the middle of it. He is without equal in Congress in terms of his support and passion for the work that we do. Representative Greg Walden, also from Oregon, chairs the House Communications and Technology Subcommittee of the Energy and Commerce Committee, that's a long line, and has a role in the House leadership. The subcommittee he leads oversees policy related to all of broadcasting, including public broadcasting. So most bills related to public broadcasting, except those dealing with how much money is appropriated, go through Representative Walden's subcommittee. And I'm actually delighted that he's heading that committee because he's got terrific background for that job, having been a radio broadcaster in an earlier life. And his valuable knowledge on these issues is going to serve us well. Up in Washington State, Representative Dave Reichert, a Republican from up in the Seattle area, is one of only 7 House Republicans to break ranks on a key vote earlier in this year that passed the House strictly along party lines. It's the kind of independence and bipartisanship that most in the Northwest really value, and frankly, it's unfortunate that it's not in greater display today. It's going to be impossible to know what the future will bring, but we're going to press forward at OPB. We're fortunate to have the benefit of serving an area known nationally as public broadcasting nirvana. It's a place where people are unusually interested in the world around them, understand our public service mission, and frankly are more willing than most to support it and protect its independence. We're just nearing the end of a $7.5 million endowment campaign initiated by a very generous challenge by our great supporters Arlene and the late Harold Schnitzer. This campaign is helping build out our endowment, which is now providing about $1 million a year for our operations. Now, these are very important funds. They provide stable support to our operations, or I should say at least as stable as the financial markets are on any given year. And in fact, we would need an awful lot more in that endowment, and keep this in mind, that we would need actually $50 million more in that endowment in order to have endowment earnings equivalent to what we get from the federal government. That's a big, big number. In the lobby of our headquarters, we have some broadcasting relics from the earliest days of OPB going back to 1922, when we were born on the campus of Oregon State University, which then was the Oregon Agricultural College. And if you ever wondered why it was KOAC, that stands for Oregon Agricultural College. We were then using AM radio, which was cutting edge. That was the cutting edge technology in 1922 to connect a largely rural state to the world through things like weather reports, crop reports, and various other news and information for the benefit of Oregon's farmers, loggers, and families. The technology and the tools have changed, but the basic mission to give more people better access to better information has not. As I look at the gentlemen, and most of them were gentlemen back then, who wore suits to work in front of these great radio consoles, I don't think our guys today will do that, but we could try. I think they would recognize their aims and their dreams in the work that we do today at OPB. It would not look all that different, even if they didn't know what an iPhone was. When public broadcasting was first granted federal funding in 1967, a kind of expansive and evolving role was envisioned. On signing the Public Broadcasting Act into law, President Lyndon Johnson made a speech, which was written by a guy you all know named Bill Moyers, who was his press secretary. And these are the words that he used when he signed this law into act. We must consider new ways to build a great network for knowledge, not just a broadcast system, but one that employs every means of sending and storing information that the individual can use. Think of the lives that this would change. The student in a small college could tap the resources of a great university. The country doctor getting help from a distant laboratory or a teaching hospital. A scholar in Atlanta could draw instantly on a library in New York. A famous teacher could reach with ideas and inspirations into some far-off classroom so that no child need be neglected. A wild and visionary idea? Not at all. Yesterday's strangest dreams are today's headlines, and change is getting swifter every moment. Well, change is getting swifter every moment. It's exciting and it's challenging. And sometimes I think it's better to be on that ship out in deep water in the open ocean than to stay in the safe harbor, in the safe harbor of that status quo. I really do appreciate the invitation to speak with you today for your support of OPB in pursuit of your support of OPB in its pursuit of its public service mission. As we like to say in our fundraising campaigns that's going on right now, we really couldn't do it without you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Steve. Before I introduce our Friday Forum host, if you have written a question on one of the index cards on your tables, now's the time to raise them so the City Club staff can come around and collect them. Our board host today is City Club President-elect Pat McCormick. For 20 years, Pat was a partner at Conkling, Fiscum, and McCormick, a public affairs, research, and public relations firm. More recently, he has become a partner in AM/PM PR, a Portland public relations firm he founded with his daughter, Allison. Pat has been a City Club member since 1969. Pat?
Thank you, Melody, and thank you, Steve, for that presentation. These are impressive changes that you reported in what's happened since you first spoke to the City Club 5 years ago. I, particularly because of the business that we're in, appreciate the expansion that's happened in terms of the role you're playing in covering the subjects that matter in the state, and that parallels the City Club's role in convening conversations about the subjects that matter in the state, and so we appreciate the fact that we get to partner on our Friday broadcasts of the Friday Forum, so thank you for that. As you have expanded the news operations, and we've had the benefit of it in listening to OPB, I'm wondering whether there are plans in your future to expand the amount of public affairs or news programming, especially long-form kind of news programming on the television side of OPB.
I get asked that frequently, Pat. It is something we have not completely discounted. I will say, though, that whenever you start working in the realm of television, the costs go up fairly significantly. And just to put some perspective on this, we can produce a year's worth of Think Out Loud programs for something less than $500,000 a year. That's 240 or 260 hours of content. You could not touch that in the television realm because you need more people. That being said, there are, I think, going to be opportunities down the road in which we can be doing more video journalism, some of which may show up on television. I will get on my soapbox and say that I have been pounding the podium with my colleagues nationally, particularly as they reinvented the PBS NewsHour when Jim Lehrer stepped down, is I believe that one of the things that would allow us to do that would be to have a kind of seamless local national model on those programs. In the same way we have that with our public radio programs, where things are produced according to a clock. You can put a 5-minute report somewhere. You don't have to produce an hour-long report. And I think if that were to start happening, it would give us a toehold into the world of TV upon which we could start growing it. The thought of starting to produce a half-hour or an hour daily news program is really daunting. A few have tried it. In fact, they're trying it in San Diego right now. They started 3 weeks ago. We're going to keep our eyes on it and see how it goes. So I don't rule it out. I just would say I don't like to promise things that I can't deliver, and it would be an exceptionally ambitious thing for us to do.
We will now take questions from the floor. As always, members are invited to the microphone to ask their questions. Asking a question at a City Club Friday Forum is a privilege of membership. Before asking your question, please identify yourself as a club member and state your name and ask your question in under 30 seconds. If I flash the famous City Club question mark, this is a reminder to you to wrap up your question. Thanks.
Don Williams, City Club member. Steve, thanks for coming back to City Club and your ongoing support of City Club. And I was surprised and pleased to find out what I didn't know about the original partnership with OPB at Oregon Agricultural College, which of course gives an opportunity to say go Beavs. But also the relationship with Mount Hood Community College appears to be very beneficial. So could you tell what other current or proposed partnerships you may have with other colleges or universities such as Portland State University?
Most of our partnerships have been built, and the one around Mount Hood Community College was built around the fact that they had a broadcast license and operating it was costing them money, and that is not the main mission of the institution. I don't know if there are other opportunities to work with colleges and universities in the same vein, but we certainly would entertain that. We do actually have a very good relationships, in particularly with Oregon State, Portland State, also with the University of Oregon, and particularly their Turnbull Center and the School of Journalism, for doing a variety of things. We use a lot of the researchers and people from Oregon State in our programs. We do joint programming with the Turnbull Center. Our friend Al Stavitsky is here from there today. And we really do look at that as being an important part of our mission. But we're very open to framing new and different kinds of partnerships for the future.
Leslie Moorhead, member of the Board of Governors of City Club. I want to ask you about your conservative audience, and I'm real pleased to hear about the fact that you're going to be hosting the Republican candidates in a nationally televised debate. But this has been on my mind for, I think, this week sometime. Lars Larson mentioned on his local talk show program that he was elk hunting out in Eastern Oregon, and maybe it was last weekend or recently, and he was forced to listen to OPB on the radio because that's the only radio station that they could get out there, which makes me say yay for OPB. But my question is, what do you do? How do you keep in mind your conservative audience and try to broaden that, and not just in the rural areas, but in the urban areas too, in the Portland area? What filter do you put on the things that you present to say, is this appealing to everyone on both sides of the political spectrum?
It's a great question. I would say that I always start with data, which is we look at a lot of audience research and surveys that are done, and the vast majority of people believe that we are balanced across the ideological spectrum. I do put a careful ear to things. I think that in particular in the way we do our environmental coverage, we know that that is one of those issues that where things look different depending on where you are. We edit those things very clearly, very carefully. I'll also tell you that Morgan Holm, who's our head of news, is very good about talking with people that have concerns. We also are doing a project that I think has tremendous opportunity. It's a thing called the Public Insight Network, where we are trying to significantly broaden our sources of news. This is a database that now tops 5,000 people who have expertise and experiences in certain areas, so that we don't have to go to the usual suspects of what I might call Rolodex journalism, that we can go find people amongst the citizenry who probably know more something about that than the so-called experts. One of the partnerships we're looking at is how to get more people from a range of ideological perspectives engaged in that, because we think one of the challenges in providing that kind of balance is sourcing. Who do you talk to help frame your stories? And that's something that we want to continue to broaden.
Rick York, I'm a City Club member, but the first thing I'd like to ask, since Steve couldn't, in the very unlikely event that any of you here happen to be listeners of OPB and are not members, as a longtime member and volunteer at OPB, I urge you to become a member. Now, my question. Okay. Now, my question relates to the earlier question about broadcast news. 7 Days was a superb program, and it was a weekly. Is there any chance that you would be able to present another half-hour news analysis program?
Anything is possible. I was not here when 7 Days was on, and in fact, I've never seen it. I will tell you that around the nation, in looking at the things that are going on with public broadcasting, is the appeal of those programs is kind of falling off, unfortunately. And I think it's because there is a tremendous amount of competition now on cable news channels. I think the good news about that is we now have more of our own journalists, that if we were to do something like that, we would not have to draw on people, as many people outside the building. The other challenge we're having is we are seeing changes in audience patterns, particularly on Friday nights, where those programs have traditionally been. One idea we have been exploring, and this may be the way we tackle that, is we would love to start experimenting with televising Think Out Loud programs more frequently. We've done several of them, and whenever we do any kind of a political debate or whatever, we tend to use that as the platform. It's not terribly hard to move that out of a radio studio into a TV studio and take it in that direction, and that is something we are thinking about, whether that would be regularly scheduled or just occasionally. But we have heard that before, and it is something we continue to look at. Do you want to?
As promised, one from the floor, and something about Oregon exceptionalism, I think. Could you compare OPB to other public media networks nationwide? Are they experiencing the same growth?
In a word, not so much. There is a bit of Oregon exceptionalism here. To some degree, I mean, sometimes in our staff meetings, we kind of have a little bit of survivor's guilt, because of the tremendous support we have here and the audiences that have been built here over the years, we are in a far better position, even though we have not had many of the funding sources that other public broadcasters have had. I mean, many of them now are facing significant cutbacks in state funding, which have been a big part of their funding mix. I'm actually rather thankful that that happened to us 10 years ago rather than now. We don't have quite the same level of philanthropic community that you might find in a place like New York or even Seattle or San Francisco, but even so, we're doing extremely well. I am concerned about what is happening in other parts of the country. I think that there are some public broadcasting organizations that are, that their funding is too much at risk. It's too heavily tilted towards government. They're too small. I think there's going to have to be some reordering of that. And you'll just find that across the country it's rather spotty. Some are doing well and some are just not. But I would say that generally speaking, OPB is kind of an exception to the trends, and we hope that continues for years to come.
Hi there, Ralph Leftwich, City Club member. Would you please make more of your radio programs available on podcasts? Your morning news includes only a few of the programs that you do. It'd be wonderful if you could package up all the local news that you do into one podcast. That would be really wonderful to be able to listen to once a day.
Great thought. I mean, I've actually thought of the same thing. What we've tended to do is not to include the stuff that shows up in the afternoon, and I think what we should do is put more together like that. So that's a great suggestion that I will bring back. Thank you.
Bill Dickey, City Club member, leadership circle person for OPB as well.
Thank you.
I'm all for the Friday night return of the political life. 7 days, McLaughlin Report, any other political shows you can put on. And in the meantime, are you going to make us listen to a third year of Lark Rise to Candleford?
Actually, if you look tonight, I believe you're going to see a new series of arts programs that are going to show up at and I think tonight it's a Gilbert and Sullivan production, so that's going to be on there for a bit. Yeah, Lark Rise to Candleford, it's not to everyone's taste, but obviously you're watching it. I will tell you a story about that is when I was working at WGBH in Boston, and we were running Are You Being Served every night at 7:30. And I had this, I mean, it had been on for years, and we decided to change it and put in Keeping Up Appearances. And we had this vision that people out there could mouth all of the lines, and I think they could. We took it off. You would have thought that Western civilization had fallen. So it's a matter of balancing all sorts of tastes. I would say the one good thing now is that we have two different channels. That if you have broadcast TV, you should be able to just kind of click back before the two. If you have satellite, unfortunately, you're out of luck. If you have Comcast, you can find them on the other channel on channel 310. So you actually do have more choices, and that does give us an opportunity. If you don't like Lark Rise to Candleford, something else will be there for you.
Ted Kay, City Club member. I know my microphone stand is leaning to the right, which is unusual for a City Club. Just a hypothetical question. I'm sorry, if somebody wrote you a check for $10 million right now, what would you do with it?
That's a great question. I think there are a couple things that we would do. The first one is we would probably add to our endowment, because one of the things you have to do when you initiate things is you have to be able to sustain them over time. And to just take $10 million and use it and burn it off 2 or 3 years, and then you're faced with the stark choice of how do I keep whatever I've put online going. I would probably open up 3 or 4 more news bureaus around the state, put one in Eugene, put one in Clark County, put one in Pendleton, LeGrand, Baker City, somewhere out in that area. We would significantly beef up our arts and life coverage. We really feel as though that's a big opportunity for us. We need kind of an editorial center to that. I would love to increase the kind of coverage we can do on radio, which is our arts and culture coverage there is a little bit limited. And I think we would also build our endowment so that we would have the ability to continue to support these sorts of initiatives over the years. And if you know of anybody that would like to write us a check for $10 million, I would love to talk to you afterwards.
All right, I'm afraid we've come to the end of our time and we'll have to stop for today. I hope all of you will join us next week when we have Sister Helen Prejean, Nobel Peace Prize nominee and the author of Dead Man Walking here. She will discuss the moral complexities of the death penalty. As we close, please join me in expressing our deep gratitude to Steve Bass of OPB for joining us today. Thank you, and we're adjourned.